Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. You know, in keeping with the intentions of our current series, Conversations in Quarantine, it has been at least 1 year since our guest and I have met face to face, and he lives within 10 miles of me. I guess that tells you something about friendships with an introvert. It's not that we don't like people, we just don't want to wear out our welcome. Now, I've been trying to get today's guest on the show since our inception. Now, here we are, 150 episodes in, and we finally have with us Glenn Parrish. And he's the guy I like to refer to as the smartest man I know. Glenn comes to us not only with intellect, but immense passion for the disenfranchised and the disregarded. As a professional philanthropist with more than 30 years of leadership experience, Glenn brings creative insight into the art of philanthropy. As a professional in philanthropy, he has overseen and facilitated, check this out, the investment of over $150 million in strategic philanthropic enterprises. Now, today, Glenn works as a partner and executive director of Sudara Inc. and the Sudara Freedom Fund. In addition, he works actively with the Massimo Foundation, the Rising Tide Joint Venture, and the Sacred Heart Foundation. So he is actively involved very deeply in philanthropy. Yes, Glenn is a man I like to consider with a rare and extraordinary intellect combined with a heart for the brokenness of humanity. And we are going to get into what I think are some really most interesting questions today. So what do you say, Paul? Let's get Glenn on the line. Let's dial him up and shock him up.
All right. He's
ready for being on air. Yeah, you have a wonderful life. Someday we'll get into the I want to say abnormal, but just perfectly delightful family situation that you have.
Yeah.
It's really incredible, and you've been there for like 20 years, is it?
Matt and I, let's see, we moved to Huntington in 1988, so it's been north of 30 years.
You've been together 30 years, so we might as well get into this just because it's so interesting. So Matt got married, and you continue to live with him. They have two children, an 18-year-old and a 7-year-old. Is that right?
Yeah, we co-parent Spencer, who's our 18-year-old, and Andrew, who is in 4th grade. He turned 11 this last year, and our dog Max, who is laying at my feet right now. But yeah, we've been a family, an intentional family for, well, Matt and I starting in 88, and then Matt dated Mary for about 10 years, so it was somewhere around 98, 2000, around 2000 they got married, and we own a house together here in Aliso. We're in the bridge of Aliso Viejo and Laguna Beach, so our kids go to Laguna Beach schools. And
Are you in Laguna Woods or near there?
We're near there. We're in Laguna Audubon, which is in Aliso, but we're in this little section that's in the Laguna Beach School District. This weird little development.
Yes, I know the section. Yeah, I was mentioning, you know, I told stories about you just before you got on the phone, and I mentioned that we haven't seen each other in probably more than a year. It's got to be close to that, and we live 10 miles apart.
Right.
I said, you know, this is what it's like to have a friendship with a relationship or a friendship with an introvert, you know. It's not that we don't like people. I said it's not that we don't like people. We just don't want to. We don't want to be intrusive.
Yep.
So I tell you, Glenn, this is, you know, I've wanted you on the show. I said I've wanted you on the show, and I've already told everybody. So high expectations for you. I've already told everybody you're the smartest man I know. So now that's one of two things. It either says that you're really intelligent, or I don't know many people.
That's yeah. Your introversion might come in there.
So I just so look forward to chatting with you every time we do have an opportunity to chat. That I have to admit, until about 2 hours ago, I had absolutely no agenda for our conversation. I just thought we would go wherever it leads us. But then an inspiration, my wife and I were talking, and an inspiration came to me, and I think it falls right into your bailiwick. So today, Glenn, you get to play Johnny Carson. Do you remember Johnny Carson's show?
Yes.
Do you remember Karnak the Magnificent?
Yeah, I remember his
kind of a fortune teller. He would answer questions. He would hold a question up to his head.
Yeah.
Well, today I'm going to ask you to play futurist. And so today I want to talk about the future. And I know you have plenty of data, plenty of information, and you're the perfect person to start about this, to talk to about this. And I could be more specific. In specific, I would like to chat about the future of nonprofits and the future of arts, which are largely nonprofit, are they not? The museums and theaters.
Yeah, largely so. Yeah.
Yeah, not solely, but largely so. And I kind of have a fear with this quarantine that it's going to impact nonprofits and the arts a lot more than I'm going to personally be pleased with. So let's start with right in your area of specific intention, and that's with nonprofits, because you have done so much work with nonprofits and philanthropy. And today I read, tell me, is this true? I read that in the best of times, as many as 50% of nonprofits are set up to fail. Do you agree with that statistic?
I'm not sure to what that is referring in terms of that they're set up to fail.
It just went through their strategies and their mission statements and their tacticals and their not mission statements, but strategic plans. They're often run by non-business oriented people, and so they're run by good-hearted people that don't understand the business behind it.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation about the relationship of business and nonprofit, and with particularly the small to mid-sized nonprofits that are started by people with a good intention to make a difference in the world, but they wind up jumping into something that is really complex, and the revenue model is based primarily on donations. And so, at the friends and family size, where people are supporting this startup, that works great. But as you grow a nonprofit, you increase its need for capital, that's just a fundamental challenge in the way nonprofits are structured. So I would describe it on the philanthropy side. If I give a nonprofit, $10,000 to grow, and they're effective, next year they come back for $15,000 or $20,000. And if they're succeeding, they have an increased need for more money. Generally, now
because they're developing, they're hiring staff, they're expanding, they're expanding their exposure, their commitment to the people they're serving.
Yeah, and it costs money, and unless they have some sort of earned revenue in the model, and everyone's kind of trying to get there, but most of these are based around donations, and it's just with that pure donation model. Once you hit a ceiling of capacity, and so a lot of kind of forward-thinking foundations invest in training nonprofit leaders to raise more money, try to grow the pie that way. But nonprofits also suffer from really frequently this lack of infrastructure, because of this model we've set up that says nonprofits should run with really low overhead, and they should do all this good, but the money's got to go to, quote, program, services rather than overhead. well, that leaves them really struggling. So they tend to be, technologically behind. It means they can't invest as much in terms of marketing dollars because the philanthropic world will ding them if their overhead gets too high. So if they spend 30% of their budget on fundraising, they're going to look bad. But we expect them to do all this fundraising and only spend 10% on it. And so it just puts them in a position where it's really challenging to grow beyond a certain scale.
And I've noticed that's really true with grant writing. Is that grant writing? They're very interested in program versus administrative or fundraising cost. And if your programming are not like at 70%, they're reluctant to write you a grant.
Yeah, and this is the kind of model that some of the major foundations now are challenging that, because there's this recognition that you actually do need to spend more money to be successful in this nonprofit space and to compensate your people well. Nonprofits lose out in terms of their ability to attract and keep talent because they can't pay them what the person could make in the regular market frequently. And so, you'll find that I found this with trying to get leaders that stay in nonprofits. You'll have younger people like in their 20s and maybe early 30s that at that point in stage of their lives, they can give their time away. But then right around when they hit 30, 31, 32, and they start having a family or want to buy a house or do some of these other things, it gets really hard in the nonprofit space to do that because you're just on the lower economic tier, particularly here in Orange County.
Yeah, and I come back to that. It's not so frequent that someone who has an experienced and acute knowledge in running a business and manage a business and growing a business are not typically your nonprofit startup ED or executive directors or founder or whatever, and they're people with great passion, great ideas, and they have really a lot of good tactical sort of strategies, if you want to call them that. And the fundraising model is not typically going after high net worth individuals. And what I have come to the conclusion is that model will get you to a certain level of success, but then not only will it not help you get the next level of success, it becomes a roadblock to your success because you need to completely change that model. And they haven't the slightest idea how to do that.
Yeah, the top tier nonprofit leaders, just a sidebar on business versus nonprofit. There's a bit, if you walk around the business world, of this thought that, well, if nonprofits only ran more like businesses, they would be more successful. And I heard a guy that ran impact investment for the Rockefeller Foundation talk about this just this morning. He's like, what business do you mean? Like Goldman Sachs? Or,
right.
What do you mean by this? And there's this kind of arrogance that comes out of the business world that says, well, we could run this better. There are aspects of understandings in business that do help, but they frequently don't understand the complexities that come with running a nonprofit and what's faced by not good nonprofit leaders. Some of the best nonprofit leaders I know could run any major company. They're deeply skilled, very clever, creative, talented, savvy, political. They're really sharp leaders. They just, in some ways, have to run an organization with one arm tied behind their backs in terms of capital and where you get money, because you are thrown into grant writing and fund development and all these things rather than having a product that someone wants to invest in. You have to kind of beg people for money to achieve your mission. And so
I have a question just real quickly on you say some of these smartest, the brightest and most functional executives of nonprofits could run businesses. What are the size of the nonprofits that you find people at that? The annual revenue of a company like that? Is it a $5 million or a $50 million nonprofit?
Well, I mean, here's part of the challenge in the nonprofit realm too, is that nonprofits tend to be smaller. The best leaders are running multi-million-dollar nonprofits that I know. Generally, probably the $2 to $5 million range. 2 to 10, somewhere in there. And so there's some really good leaders running smaller enterprises too. But because of the challenges of getting capital into your nonprofit organization, it's really hard to scale. There was research, it was like from 1975 to mid-2000s, like 144 nonprofits scaled past $50 million in revenue, and it was like 43,000 businesses did here in the United States. It's just, once you get to larger sizes, you're channeled towards, like you said, major donors. Well, everyone's knocking on the same doors, Right. Particularly, just take it here in Orange County. I mean, the Samuelis and the major players are kind of a limited pool, and everybody has their galas and and that move towards pushing people towards major donors, because that's the most cost-effective way you can get money into a nonprofit. So if you're pushing towards this low overhead model, you go, well, the quickest way I can get money is talk to my friend who has a family foundation or owns this business, and they can just write a check for $50,000 or $100,000. That's really cost effective, but it's also super risky.
The problem is you get pushback from that after a while. So now you've got to find new donors that have that kind of cash in their pocket.
There's this donor fatigue that sets in, and it's so funny because I've seen this happen. I serve on the board of a family foundation here in Orange County, and I've seen the principle of that foundation, where we actually invest in training nonprofits to raise money, get frustrated with the nonprofit leader that keeps coming back to him asking for more money. And you go, but we've been teaching them to do this, and teaching them to upsell so that they can get more capital, because that's how they fund their operations. And so it's this weird kind of game where it's kind of kick the can down the road to someone else. You go, well, we'll fund you, but then I'm going to get tired of doing that, and so you have to find someone else.
So what you're saying is, even in the best of times, I sound like what's her name from British TV with Jordan Peterson. So what I hear you saying is in the best of times, this is most difficult. Now, I read in the whatever. Oh, my Siri is working, and I have no idea why it's going on. I read in the San Diego Tribune that the great majority of nonprofits, the smaller nonprofits in the county, had 2 months of run rate, or 2 months that they could pay expenses without donation, or they were out of business. Yeah. And if you're depending on high net worth individuals, unless they're extremely high net worth individuals, are not earning the money right now, and so they're reluctant to give. So what is the future? And it's going to be for a while. We're going to be in some economic downturn this is not, the opening up is not the end all and be all. We're in this for some while. What do you think is the future of these smaller nonprofits?
Well, and I actually run a small nonprofit as Sudara Freedom Fund, which is the nonprofit arm of our Sudara business. And I'm experiencing these very things that I've been talking to, other folks about, which is, our major donors, we've tried to be real, and I have to be really kind of careful in this space too, because I'm really a grant maker by background, and I've got a lot of trusted relationships, and so I have to kind of guard those relationships.
You can't get donor fatigue or friendship fatigue because I don't want to be. I've been kind of on the other end of that for a long time, where development directors hunt me for a living. And I don't want to be that person. For a living, like bounty hunters.
Oh, totally. I know. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. And so donors are, all the things that have happened to us in this are affecting them. Which I've got a very close friend who runs a major foundation here, and they're dealing with being at home. Some of them have kids and families, and they're dealing with all the issues around that personal crisis that's happening, and that kind of barrage of news and stuff. And then every nonprofit organization they support is in some sort of crisis now.
Right.
And so we're just seeing the first wave of the appeals that'll come out, but they're going to be wave after wave of these appeals that come out.
So what do you think is the future of these nonprofits in this situation, Glenn? I mean, do you think we're going to see the closure of a lot of nonprofits?
Yes. Yeah. There's going to be, some will hang on as long as they can. We got our, a small PPP loan that finally, dropped into our account. That gives us, probably another month of run room with everything we're doing. And we're crafting new strategies right now where we're actually going after small donations, small monthly donations. And so our take on this is going to be, hey, $5 a month, $10 a month is a great, let's go small and with lots of people.
Yeah,
that's
you've got to have,
much more
you have to have access to those people.
Well, that's our unique position with the Sudara Freedom Fund and Sudara model, is that we have Sudara, the business, is reaching out to thousands and thousands of, hundreds of thousands of customers.
Oh, really?
And so, and so people are able to add on a donation to a purchase that they make through Sudara. Well, we acquire new donors on a regular basis on that small level, and now can talk to them about upgrading to a monthly contribution, or they may just choose to do a monthly contribution along with a purchase. So we're drafting on the marketing dollars that a for-profit company is spending, which is one part of our model that has been, at its best, really, really effective. And at our peak, when we're doing about, at our peak as a business, and there's all sorts of things to talk about the business, but we were doing about $4 million in sales. We were acquiring 300 to 500 new donors every month at $10, $25, $50, $100. So that was a great advantage. Now we're having challenges on the business side for all sorts of reasons of the pandemic and digital online sales, but that we still find that as our sales grow, we have a consistent number of people that join us as donors. So the small donation model, and that's a challenge for other nonprofits. That's a hard model for a regular nonprofit to tackle because it's expensive to acquire small donors.
Yeah, and you don't have
mailing
reach.
List.
It's like you just don't have the reach. Yeah. It's like Amanda Palmer and Maria Popova, of Brain Pickings. She lives solely on donations that are, just sort of online monthly donations. But she has 1 million readers a month. So so the small, that's one of the things that's emerging now, and I've seen it with some musician friends. With another, I have a lady that I support that supports LGBT in the faith folks in the faith space. All 12 of them.
Yeah, there's a lot. I support her as a patron, so it's through Patreon. I think that model,
right. That's what Amanda
community
Palmer does.
Yeah, the community getting behind the folks that are doing valuable work that isn't going to make a bunch of money in the market, that just requires sort of patronage. I think that small personal model is one that we're seeing emerge, and we're being forced to move towards it. Because our major donors, so they've kind of gone radio silent. I've reached out to my friend a couple times and said, hey, if you guys are considering doing something this year with us again, if you could accelerate that would really help us in terms of our planning of where we go from here. And again, this is a major foundation. This is like a $500 million foundation, and I haven't heard back. And I'm a friend, so I've got all the clout that you would expect that comes from that, and it's hard.
Well, they're just getting overloaded with requests.
Well, and I'll put on another hat. I also run I manage the grants for a small family foundation, and it's on my list to reach out to all my grantees and see how they're doing. And I haven't been able to get to that yet. And so they haven't heard anything from me. A couple have reached out. I had a long conversation with one of them. But it's just part of this complexity of what's going on.
It sounds like a staff position apart from you, that if you had resources, that you would have a regular donor relations person.
Well, these are organizations we support.
Oh, I see. I
run a small grant making foundation, and so we support orphan care on a kind of local and global basis. So we have projects in India and the Philippines and Africa, and locally. And so, but I haven't reached. It's on my list to reach out to my grantees, the ones that received our funds, and just see how they're doing. But again, the big organizations have already reached out to me, and you can see them working to pivot, do stuff, and get the word out and try to be sensitive. And, so I get the really personal outreach from the director of development from one of the really large organizations just to make sure I'm okay. And I know that's exactly the strategy that I have told our folks we need to use. But, they're checking to see if I'm okay because they're going to need a lot of money. We canceled 2 major fundraising events for our organization that would have, we're a small foundation, but we had an event scheduled in April on with a friend of our foundation. It was going to be a great new outreach to a new community of folks in Virginia. This lady and her husband have a house on Babel Island, and so they're connected here. They know our organization. They're really supportive. They have all these high net worth and well-connected friends. We're going to do it on a boat with a kind of a cruise theme in April. 150, 200 people. Well, you know where that went.
Yeah. So how is that? What are your feelings? What are your impressions about how this quarantine and this COVID virus are going to be impacting for how long are they going to be impacting nonprofits? I mean, I know that's impossible. It's really impossible to predict, but at least for several months, would you not think? Oh,
yeah. I mean, well, and you noted the challenge in this, and this is a challenge across the board with small, mid-sized colleges and universities that had about a month run room or 2 months run room in reserves. There's just the crisis for the nonprofits is going to just build, and so there's going to be a lot of different people innovate. There's probably going to be some consolidations, but we don't know.
Yeah, and it's just dropping off the map. Yeah.
Yeah. On the other side, there's been some really, really hopeful signs in this space too. Not broadly, across the board, but there are organizations, and people are being very generous to support organizations here. Like locally, I know there's an emergency fund that I think is probably around $5 million now that some of the major foundations, the Community Foundation, run by a friend of mine, Shelley Haas, and a few others, help put together an emergency fund to support those organizations that are working on the front lines here of helping people, so getting food to people, rent support, all sorts of things. The organizations that are working with the homeless, where there's these, potential major crisis in a homeless shelter and such with COVID-19. So people have been generous, but it's really focused on this COVID-19 issue.
Yeah.
The organizations that aren't doing that, like the arts and the others, people are trying to pivot to figure out how they survive in this new world.
Yeah, and that's what I want to talk about next. So, but we're going to take a break in one quick sec, but I just want to make a comment that this really does encourage those that do have a bit of extra resources, that there probably is no more of a critical time. If you have a charity that you are especially fond of, there probably is no better time in the last decade than to donate some resources to them if you have it. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about another thing I'm passionate about, and that's the arts.
Okay.
Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and I am with an incredible guest, Glenn Parrish, who is a philanthropist, a musician, a teacher. He's done so many things in his life. He's truly the Renaissance man. And we just discussed the future of nonprofits in the shorter term, who knows, longer term, as they're impacted by the quarantine. But I want to talk about the arts, which are, largely nonprofit. And Glenn, I want to talk about, for instance, just something simple here in Orange County, South Coast Repertory, which is a nonprofit, which I was not even aware of until today, that South Coast Repertory was a nonprofit, that they receive 35% of their revenue from donations. And it is a major theater. This is not a lightweight theater. This is a pretty big time theater that does a lot of first run productions and does an excellent job. And what are they going to do? They have about a 500 seat major, the big auditorium, about 500 seats. And unless they fill that on a regular basis, they can't make their nut. And if you go to social distancing, where you're going to reduce the crowds by 2/3 or 3/4 or whatever, they can't pay the bills. What's going to happen to the theaters? What's going to happen to the museums, LACMA and the Broad, and places that I love to visit, that I love to spend my time?
Yeah.
Are they going to disappear? Are they going to be able to make it? I mean, what's the deal?
I don't. In some ways, you'd probably have to talk to them to see because they've been thinking about this, what they do with their public spaces. I mean, I think there's an ancillary kind of issue here with restaurants. So restaurants are kind of, in some ways, these performance spaces on a small scale. Restaurants run on really thin margins. I grew up kind of in the restaurant business. My dad was in the restaurant business his whole career. And so the idea that a restaurant could shrink its number of tables or people it's serving down to a quarter of what it was doing before and survive, well, for most restaurants, that just doesn't work. And so I think that same issue with these large public spaces. I don't know what large public gatherings are going to look like, other than you're going to need, masks and 6 feet of space and really carefully organize entrances and exits. And I don't know how that reemerges.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking because I'm so devoted to the arts, and that's selfish, but it brings such pleasure and enrichment to my life.
Yeah. I mean, this is in terms of performances and all that. I mean, we have this across sports and across all these large gathering points. At least for a while, we're going to have to be really reimagined.
Oh man, my son is facing it now. He's a baseball player, and he's just sitting at home, and they're talking about that you're going to go play in empty stadiums. Well, when 70% of the baseball club's revenue is based on stadium ticket sales, concession sales, and if you even go to allow people, but it's social distancing, you're going to go from a 40,000 seat facility to a 10,000 seat facility, and yet they have these salaries that are just outrageous that they have to pay that they could afford when they were filling up 40,000 seat facilities. But it's quite different. So my son is sitting around going crazy, longing to play baseball, and that's happening. That's happening with actors. That's happening with artists. Where are they going to show their where are they going to show their works? And we've had a demise culturally in the arts. Maybe this, perhaps, Glenn, could this work counterintuitively, and could this, in the long run, increase the need for arts when you take it away, that people find what they miss?
Well, I mean, I think we see it happening online right now, is that this transition to performances, and I was going to figure out with a couple of friends how we perform online. I've seen a number of people doing it. Requires some coordination and dealing with lag time issues online.
Oh man, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how in the world you do it.
There are ways to do it, but so there's different things happening in different spaces. So some of the museums and some of the it's going to depend on if they're a well endowed museum. Like the Getty or some of these other spaces, you could
Eli Broad is not going to get hurt out of this.
Yeah, and those museum spaces, you could see them working with social distancing and people wearing masks. That could work. It's just a matter of using this, the space. So they're going to, the endowed ones will go on, and it'll depend on, how much money they have in the bank. The performance venues and all that, I don't know what I don't know what emerges, particularly in this over the short run of the next couple of years until we have a vaccine or reach herd immunity.
Or at least, or until we have herd immunity.
Which again, that's like that's a, from what I read of the experts in that's a ways off too. So
yeah, and and it comes to that. I've been saying it for over a month now, and I finally read it. And it's not like I was the one who came up with it, but it essentially is how many deaths are acceptable. That's really the bottom line question.
That's actually that's a horrible equation.
It is a horrible equation.
We suffer. Just a kind of side note on this, and I noticed this. I was supposed to be in the Philippines. Actually, I would have been leaving for the Philippines today. It was a trip with a foundation I serve on the board of. We fly down to Mindanao every year, the southernmost island in the Philippines. We have we've been funding projects there for 13 or 14 years. Our trip was supposed to be in January and got kicked to May because of a volcano erupting near Manila. And it wasn't until kind of 2 weeks ago, maybe, that the principal of this family foundation actually technically canceled the trip. And it was easy to see a month before that, or a month and a half before that, that there was absolutely no way this trip was going to happen. But I think there's this just kind of tilt towards hopefulness that we have, which is, it's not a bad thing, but it's kind of not grounded sometimes. It's just like,
it's not a bad thing and it's not grounded, but, it certainly appears to me to be an American thing.
Yeah.
And that we just do not accept failure, or we do not accept, I'm using it way too much now. The quote that I think I told you my friend said, "Hell hath no fury like an inconvenienced American."
Yeah.
But it is a matter of inconvenience as much as anything.
Yeah, well, and it's if you couple that with a bit of this American anti-intellectualism, distrust of quote unquote experts, and a lot of this has been kind of fueled by in the debate on the political side, but there is this sort of anti-intellectual kind of strain that runs through our culture. We've seen it in the conservative church world, and it shows up other places too.
What have we seen in the church world? We've seen anti-intellectualism, or more toward intellectualism.
Anti-intellectualism, and
really?
The evangelical side and the conservative church world. This dismissing science.
Okay. I thought you meant I thought you were saying they were dismissing sola scriptura.
No, the dismissal of science and and that runs through. There's a bit of that runs through the culture as a whole, and so I mean, it's just kind of summarized for me in the picture of the doctors that are working with the current political administration, watching them sit there while things are said that makes.
Oh yeah, watch their heads hand turning down.
Yeah, just going. Oh, you can see how painful it is for them, and so that that's a dangerous combination of being just mindlessly optimistic and not paying attention to science. That's not going to help us right now.
Yeah, I read an article today about Dr. Bright. Are you familiar with Dr. Bright? And he's an immunologist that was terminated because he was coming out, in favor that we need to really be doing a lot of things because he's been an immunologist for a long time, and it just didn't fit with the political agenda, and he was just blatantly fired off of his job, and his job was purely intellectual. And that was all he was interested in. And this is the first time I've really, as much as I've noticed it, sort of, just by happenstance, a feeling of anti-intellectualism. I've never heard anybody really speak of an anti-intellectualism in the United States, and it really is true. It not only has to do with the distrust of the intellectuals, but and I will include myself on it, it's the USA Today tendency and the Twitter tendency and the Facebook tendency of we just want to read something quickly. We don't want to read 10 pages and have to digest 10 pages of information, which is really going to give us much more insight into the situation.
Yeah. Well, and some of that is our, desire for convenience. Convenience is almost a god. One of the things that's been floating around, I ran across an Isaac Asimov quote, which was from like 1980 or so. But
he lived that long? I didn't know he lived that long.
Yeah, I think he was. That's the last date I had on this. I have to go.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's just. I trust you.
So he said there's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there has always been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge.
You have that memorized, or you were reading it?
I just read that. Yeah. There's a couple things that stand out to me in that, and one is, and Asimov could come off as arrogant. There has been a backlash against a certain intellectual arrogance that says my intellectual knowledge conveys some sort of great power on me, and a lack of an understanding of what it means to be human and humble. And so we do have a bit of that fuels the other side to say, oh, these ivory tower intellectuals don't know real life, and our metaphor is the trap, the guy who pulls himself up by his bootstraps makes it through grit and determination, and distrusts the snooty East Coast elites, the intellectual elites on both coasts. And so,
please go ahead.
The intellectuals the intellectuals I think have played into that in some ways. And the Asimov quote, I think, does that. It's intentionally provocative, but on the other side, I think there's a lot of truth to it. That there is a sort of a combination of unwillingness to go deep into arguments or lack of patience for a nuanced view of things, and desire for a simple, quick, sure answer. And so we tend to trust people who give us those things, be they self-help gurus or, business people. That seems to be a very, very American thing too.
Do you think? I can think pretty much. I can say I never get political on this show, but I can't help but think. Do you think the current administration is thriving on this distrust of intellectualism and the idea of let's just pull up our bootstraps and work harder, and that's all it takes, that the intellectuals really don't know what they're talking about? That this administration seems to discount a lot of good science in favor of wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if?
Yeah, clearly. I mean, just the purge of scientists, and I have a friend who is a PhD in physical chemistry, and just talking about what he's seen in the whole scientific world with this distrust of just kind of facts. It's the politicization of everything. I think that's the world we live in right now, where everything turns towards the political, which is about power rather than knowledge and truth and even what it means to be humane.
Do you think that's true of the superpowers only, or is that true of the majority of the? I wouldn't say just the Western world, but that's all with which I have a lot of familiarity, except for developing countries. I have some familiarity with that, and that's a whole different story. But
yeah,
do you think that's that's common in the Western world and in the Eastern world?
The politicization.
I mean, well, with superpowers, China, Russia, and the United States, all sort of have this distrust or lack of use of good intellectual science.
Yeah, I think those are complicated places, but in general, because we've got this ability to throw stuff up on the internet and tweet stuff, and in a Marshall McLuhan-esque way, the pace of communication has just increased, and the amount of content in that communication has decreased. So it tends to become these sort of tribal communications, which tend towards memes and God and devil words, and so you have to very quickly recognize whether someone's on your side or not. And so in that political environment, people are trying to spin it for their own gain. And so, you have people spinning disinformation, making money off of the internet. And so, the rise of kind of deep disinformation is huge. And then when you have political folks fanning the flames of that, it makes it really hard for the average person to trust any source. So we're in this crisis of epistemology,
Yeah, and the difficulty in this, and I wrote a blog about it last week, and on patience, and the last person I would want to be on in the United States today is a politician, because there are no right decisions. I mean, there are right decisions, but you won't know until after the fact. There is just not enough data to make any good decisions.
And you have to make decisions, and you have to
make decisions.
Yeah. Or they're made for you, or it's a terrible place to be. But that's what you need leaders for, is to step into these spaces. And we've seen different leaders at the governor level that have been, I think, more impressive in the way they've handled things and what they've tried to do. I think there's some good examples out there. But we didn't mean to spin the arts into politics. But
I did, I didn't mean to, but I'm the blame for doing that. But I want the listeners to know that this is not a podcast. This is my normal conversation with Glenn Parrish. We don't talk about the movies we've seen. It is some kind of philosophy that he's always enlightening me on, and I so appreciate time. You can't believe I had a third subject, Glenn. And we're done now. The podcast is over. But I had a third subject. I had nonprofits, the arts, and then I said, here is what I put. If we have time, I'd like your opinions on the hope of the church in an age of radically declining attendance and interest in general. I think that's a podcast by itself.
Yeah.
Well, it has been such a pleasure, as always, chatting with you. You are so insightful and so learned that you really provide great information for us.
Well, I hope. It sounds rather bleak as we talk about it right now, but I look forward to the emergence of, and I wish we could have gotten into this. So we're working to build an investment ecosystem here in Orange County that tilts things towards businesses that are really making a difference and getting capital to people who have been left out of the equation. Underserved folks, and there's a ton of creativity that happens by folks who typically haven't had access to capital, either because of their color, because of their level of income, where they live. And we're building a system here that's going to engage more of those folks and provide opportunities, hopefully, for them to build enterprises that are sustainable. And we're going to need that more than ever. I mean, the really terrible thing in the midst of all this is that the people who are worse off are getting worse off now, you know?
Yeah, that's always the truth. And I know you have really creative ideas that sometime we'll get into. But for now, it's our time for our podcast. Hang on, I want to chat with you after we're done. Do you mind if people get in touch with you, Glenn, if they have any questions for you, or are you too tied up?
You know, I've got a lot going on right now. If someone wants to hunt me down through LinkedIn or
because you're on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Okay, so they've got to hunt you down. I like that. You want to talk to me?
Yeah. Hunt
me down.
Find me.
Okay, my friend. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Okay. And I also want to thank our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie, and to remind you to be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.
You've been listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie right here in Orange County's only community radio station, OCTalkRadio.net.